VenomousStare returns with another Starcraft 2 video, and this one is going to be for the beginners. So recently, I started trying to learn and get good at the game Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Counter-Strike is similar to Starcraft in many ways, despite it being a first-person, team-based shooter as opposed to a 1v1 RTS game. Counter-Strike has a very high learning curve. It's a game that requires you to master macro mechanics before you can really become good at the game. It's not a game like Call of Duty or, you can take your pick of other games that are very easy to get good at and have a low skill ceiling and are aimed at casuals. League of Legends is another good example of a game that's aimed at casuals. Starcraft and Counter-Strike aren't like this. You have to look inward and you have to reflect upon your own play to improve. The main way this is done is using replays. Both Counter-Strike and Starcraft have built-in very good, legitimate, consistent replay clients within their game. And why do I add the qualifiers of legitimate and consistent? Because you have games like the most recent Call of Duty game, which I've been uploading some commentaries of, Cold War, where the replay client is absolute garbage, it's a buggy mess, and it's not really a legitimate tool that can help you improve in the same way that a StarCraft or Counter-Strike replay is. So today, I sort of realized that when I was viewing one of my Counter-Strike replays, aka demos, they're called demos in Counter-Strike, but obviously StarCraft players would call them replays, and that's the better name for them. Watching one of my Counter-Strike demos, and I was just terrible as an observer in the little in-game Counter-Strike replay function in terms of like being able to bounce out and show the nade spots and like all the cool stuff I'm able to do like in StarCraft as an observer, because played 10 plus games of StarCraft and casted over 500 games just on my own channel. So it occurred to me that I should make a guide video in StarCraft of how to use the basic functions of the replay client, and that I should really focus on just dumbing it down to the lowest common denominator in this one specific video. Frequently in my videos, I will target it towards the most hardcore player, the fan who just loves StarCraft and is already at a Diamond Plus level. This is not going to be one of those videos. I'm really going to get down into the basics for your fresh out the box, maybe even younger player who just bought this first PC. So don't be like the hard ass in mid-platinum league that's like, well, I already knew all this. Guarantee you're going to learn at least one thing you didn't know. So let's start with the very most basic function, how to get to the replay. You see these tabs at the top, they're all bound to the F key, campaign F1, co-op F2, versus F3, so on. You can just hit F7 and jump right to the replays. So now we're going to get into probably the most complicated technical part of this, because this is the only part of the tutorial that's going to be like a computer tutorial and not like a StarCraft specific tutorial. So let's say that you ripped a replay pack off the internet of the most recent tournament and you want to see how pro gamers play and you can't figure out how to access the replays. So first things first, you're probably going to download a replay pack in a RAR file, and you need to download the program WinRAR, WinRAR. It's just your basic free unboxing and unzipping program. Because StarCraft 2 replays are frequently released in tournament packs with folders upon folders upon folders, they're in zipped RAR files. So you have to have a software that unzips RAR files. And if you're like panicking and you're angry and that you're upset and you're frustrated, don't. Download WinRAR. It's free. You download WinRAR, you unzip the folder, and then here's what you do. You click this folder, show in folder. So here we see the left side of my computer, which shows what I have, and then here at the top we basically see the StarCraft 2 replay folder. So what you want to do is right click and go to new and just make a new folder. Like mine has pro replays, and then after you make a folder, you can drag and drop the unzipped folders that contain your replays into your client. So that's the most difficult part. Let's just say you downloaded a bunch of pro replays and you want to view them. You just use WinRAR to unzip them. Once they're unzipped, you drag and drop them into your pro replay folder or whatever you name it. And then let's just say that you drop it in and it's not there. You just need to go to let's just say you unzip it, drop your replays in, and then at the top you click and they're not there. You just have to like go back and then go back to the replay tab and it'll sort of refresh and update. Alright, so that's the most simple as far as rudimentary, how to literally access the replays within the game. But we can go ahead and talk about how to actually view the replay itself now. So here we have a game where I played a 2v2 versus this mouthy cretin named Why Not, and he challenged me to a 1v1. So I'm going to double click on that replay to open it. And I'm basically going to go over all the hotkeys for you. This is going to be a very meaty video. Okay. So the first thing we do when we start a Starcraft replay is drop this box because you don't want the time to be spoiled. And then we hit D for production because that's just the standard tab you want. And then you hit Control N to bring the scoreboard up. So obviously there was a little bit of contention because this was a grudge match. This guy was running his mouth constantly talking about how he owned noobs, yet he was playing on the unranked ladder. So this guy was running his mouth and griefing in 2v2 but didn't even have the courage to stake ladder points on it. So I'm sort of laughing at him about that. So if we click on the tab here, we need to consider what do we look at. Now remember, this video is targeted towards newbies. The StarCraft 2 veteran might know almost always you're going to want production tab up, or when there is a upgrade relevant situation about to happen. Let's say a very common one. The Zerg is researching 2-2 and the Terran is researching 2-2 and the big fight's about to happen. And one of the players is going to finish 2-2 before the other. That's when you hit G for upgrades. And then if any time you want to show the income, you hit I. Now if ever Hellions run in someone's base and do a bunch of damage and you want to show how many drones die, you hit Control R and that'll bring up this tab, and then you hit Control R again to collapse it. Now M for APM is a tab that gets a lot of attention because APM is sort of like one of the most basic things a non-StarCraft player can identify with is, wow, they're going really fast. But in the early game, APM doesn't matter. There's literally nothing to do. I'm literally at 65 here. And my opponent here, who has no brain cells, is just ruthlessly spamming away boxing. So incredibly thirsty to win, not doing anything at all. This is just spam. 350 actions of spam. You can see in the mid game, this guy isn't going to play at 350 APM. He's like a 150 APM player. So you don't want to bring the APM tab up in the early game because it literally means fucking nothing. You don't have the production up. So another thing, you can hit Control Z to zoom out. You're going to want to have Control Z hit and be zoomed out at all times. Let's just say you wanted to do player intros and you wanted to do like a zoom in panning shot. You would go to normal depth. You would kind of start over here. And then, in order to smoothly view replays in the StarCraft 2 client, you're supposed to use the middle mouse button, because if I just go to edges like I'm playing, see how jerky it is? But if I use the middle mouse button to pan around, it's more smooth. So if we want to just follow the Reaper, which is a very common scenario, instead of having to manually observe, we would just left click on the Reaper and hold Control F. That's the hotkey for follow. But it's very frequent that you're going to need to do panning shots in a replay. So either use your arrow keys like this or use the middle mouse button, push it in for more smoothness. What you don't want to do is like move around left and right as though you were playing a game, because that's real jerky. Also, if you want to do panning shots, you should left click on the minimap. As you see my third go down, that sort of goes without saying. Obviously you don't want to fucking like scroll across like that. You just get flamed out of the game for that. So if you wanted to do like a panning intro shot, you would go to normal, and then as you move to the right, you would hit delete, and you would do like a zoom in, and then sort of like a counterclockwise motion. But the delete and the insert key are the keys that turn the screen left and right. And really, you don't want to go crazy with these. You just want to really focus on these whenever you can't see the action. So let's just talk about a few things that you should consider whenever you look at your own replays, because we've talked about the fundamental mechanics of how to just view the replay as just a general player. Now we're going to sort of talk about if at first the video was kind of like if I want to download pro replays and watch them or maybe cast them, what do I do? This is going to be more like if I'm in Gold League and lost a really embarrassing game and want to look at my own replay, what do I look for? Like, what are the things that I need to be looking for to improve my own game? First thing is supply blocks. Supply blocks are absolute cancer in StarCraft 2 and absolutely gut your macro. So whenever you watch yourself play, you need to be consistently watching for your own supply blocks. If you go out of your way to limit these and make sure you never run into supply blocks, you'll find yourself gaining at least an entire division level in a very short amount of time. It's that important. Second thing we need to look at is our money. StarCraft is not necessarily a game just about attacking, as we see the Hellions trying to be cleared. It's not a game about just attacking or killing your opponent or rushing them. It's a game about resource and crisis management. So you want to be consistently looking at your resources here to make sure you're spending your money. Remember, especially from a Zerg perspective, you want to be constantly pumping drones and queens in the early game to try to establish an economic advantage, get creep going out on the map, and all that good stuff. Another thing, if we just go to my vision here, let's look how much vision I have out on the map. I see his third, I can see a move out, I can see the corners. I have decent enough creep spread to sort of see the middle of the map. And the creep spread, because it reached down onto the low ground, saw that coming and crushed it. And whenever you're Zerg, in general, you want to just keep making queens and drones in the early game because it protects you against so many things. Of course, drones don't really protect you from anything, but they are the bread and butter of the race. Lots of queens. I like to keep mine on 8 hotkey, which is bound to my mouse key. And this is just the standard Zerg style we see, where Zerg rushes out 3 bases and as many drones as possible and goes into 1-1 upgrades with lots of creep spread to try to defend the Terran. And by the way, this is one of the best Terran maps in the pool. It's pretty congested. So what else do you need to look for whenever you're viewing your own replay other than supply blocks and money float? Look at your production in terms of when you get what you want relative to your gas count. A Banshee is about to fly in without me knowing, and one thing that I want to look for here is how long does it take me to defend even though I was caught with my pants down? And how long do I get my shit back together? How many drones do I lose? So see that? The Banshee flies in, I have no idea it's coming, and it only gets 3 drones before I pull. That's pretty good. New players, if a medevac drop comes or a Banshee comes or DTs come, you don't want to sit there and lose drones. I know that might seem obvious to your veterans, but when I was in Gold League, I would always think like, well, if I lose 5 workers, it's actually less bad than me like having to pull off for a second because of lost mining time. No, that's not the case. You want to prioritize saving your workers. So here, obviously the layer is not done and no spores are up. So this is a situation in which things can get really hairy. And an intelligent player will try to maybe run in Hellions when you deal with this. We see this in GSL a lot in terms of players will always try to do one thing as another thing occurs, aka testing the other person's multitasking. And this is just sort of like a core component in StarCraft. You want to try to attack whenever their screen is in a different place. You want to try to force the other person to do more actions than they're truly capable of. And one of the things that prevented him from doing that is this creep spread. If you're Zerg, creep spread not only is very useful in the backbone of your defense, but it's the sort of thing that can buy you time and prevent you from losing to stuff like over-droning. One very important thing in ZVT is queen retention. Notice how that even when he aggresses upon my queens, I run them back and try to transfuse them. And a lot of times, whenever attack hits you and you're not ready for it, if you do have good creep spread, this will happen, where the Terran smells blood in the water, and even though they haven't scanned and cleared the creep and waited for it to dissipate, you can go in and defend like this. So even though my Bane speed was late, a lot of this has to do with upgrades. I established 1-1 before he established his 1-1 in shields, so this would be a phenomenal time to hit the I key, or not the I key, but the G key rather, for upgrades, because the reason that this push stalls out so hard, in addition to the creep spread, is the upgrade. So if I was casting and observing a game, I would want to have the upgrades tab here to show the point of the story, and then pull the upgrades up, show how close 1-1 was. So that's a good example of how you can use the tabs to properly storytell. Now, what else do you need to be looking for whenever you're considering, oh, I just lost this tough ladder game, I'll watch the replay and see what went wrong? Let's just say you're Zerg, because I think that Zerg is like the most valuable and easy race to be able to watch the replay and benefit from, Because a lot of times with Terran and Protoss, it's like with Protoss, I did this 2 base build and he scouted it and it failed. Or with Terran, I wasn't watching my Hellions and I got surrounded and I fell behind and lost. Because Zerg is like the reactive race, the race that focuses most around scouting your opponent, keeping them honest, pumping workers. It's not the race where you're sort of keeping up tempo and making stuff happen. This is the race where you're going to be sort of puzzled and like looking at replays the most and figuring out what went wrong. Because a lot of times when you lose with Protoss and Terran, you know like, oh yeah, well I fucked my first push up and lost. So whenever you play Zerg, a lot of it's going to be based on like, okay, this push got to my front door without me realizing and I died. What happened? Well, I didn't scout him. I didn't see if it was mech or bio. I didn't have a Ling out in front of his third or fourth or natural to see the push coming. These are the things that you need to be looking for whenever you view a replay, especially at a lower level. Whenever you die to an unsuspecting push, even if you're Terran or Protoss, ask yourself, did I have something at the front of his door watching for a push, whether it be an observer or a changeling or a Ling? You got to have something to scout. Got to keep map control. Anytime you you lose a Starcraft game and you try to ask yourself, why do I lose? What can I do to improve? You always have to be able to take an intellectually honest look back at yourself and your own play and your own flaws. This is why people quit Starcraft, why it's such a daunting game, and why it causes people to become discouraged. Because you have to do that so many times as a Starcraft player to look back at yourself and say, well, what went wrong? What did I do wrong? And the average gamer is just going to default to, it's my ally, it's imbalanced, that's why I lost. The average person doesn't want to look inwardly and say, well, I lost because my macro was bad. I ballooned up, I got supply blocked, I didn't spend my money adequately. These are the things that you need to be looking at. See, like, look right here. Terran pushes at my front door. If I had died to this, it probably would have been because I was supply blocked or I was floating money. Maybe I didn't have enough hatcheries to adequately spend my money. If you find yourself floating money but you're like hitting your injects and never have idle larvae, you need to make a macro hatch. So that's another thing you need to consider whenever you watch replays, especially in Zerg versus Terran as Zerg, is, am I having larva trouble? Am I getting bottlenecked by my larva? And in this case I'm not, because we see my injects are good, there's lots of queens, and there's plenty of hatcheries. Notice how I'm not floating money. I'm at 100, 600, which a lot of when you don't have your Mutatech out yet and you're going Ling Bane, you'll fucking spend like all your minerals making a big swell of Lings, and when they finish, then you'll spend your gas on Bane. So the fact to have a little bit of extra gas here as opposed to minerals is normal. Notice I'm on 60 drones. I'm beating him in the worker count. I'm on a really good economy. So let's see what happens. And this isn't just me normally casting a game. All those things I pointed out are important. 60 drones, good economy. And the moments I pause, these are the moments you want to pause in your own game. The enemy is hitting you. This is when you pause and take account of what you have. I have Bane's making. I have X amount of workers compared to his amount of workers. He's on 3 base. I'm on 4 base, standard for CVT. Look at what he has in terms of what does he have to pressure me with in terms of production. This guy doesn't really have enough barracks to really be able to like have as much stuff as he should, and he's trying to go for more of like a tank centric or factory centric mix. And if you delay like your 5th to 8th racks, you run into situations like this where your army is a little bit smaller than it should be. So he clears creep. Again, this is one thing you always need to focus on. If I'm being attacked versus Terran, how much time, or even Protoss, how much time do they have to waste clearing creep? How often do they like push to mid-map and go, Jesus, this creep is out here, and now I have to scan, wait. This is your real bread and butter backbone defensive mechanism as Zerg, is spreading your creep all over the map for vision and for speed. So here we saw me go for an earlier push to try to break his third, and I'm going to try a similar thing here. Of course, I want to focus the tanks and run the Banes into the mineral line. Tanks do phenomenal splash and kill most of my Banes, thankfully. And this is a weird moment. So this is a moment where when you're playing, let's just look at this right here. It looks like I have so many lings, and I'm just going to break him. But if we fucking hit insert, we can see the side view, and if we scroll our mouse wheel, we can zoom in. So what's actually happening here? There's more bio down here than there looks. It's protecting the tank along with the shrub, and SCVs are protecting. So right here I right click on the tank, and because there's no surface area and it's being repaired, I lose like 30 lings for nothing. So that's an example of like when you would need to use insert to delete to like change the POV. Because actually in the game I was like, why the fuck won't the tank die? It's because he clicked his like 5 remaining SCVs on the tank. So what else do we want to look at when we improve? We want to consider what is our like tech path and what is our end goal. In this instance it's like mutiling, baneling, and eventually into ultra, but we're really focusing on mutiling, baneling to try to defend the mid game, because the reason this map is so good for Terran is look is where this bozo takes his third. It's literally like 2 screens away from being able to push at my fourth with insane high ground. So at this point he knows that's the place to push. He's failed at pushing my third. He knows I have creep out here. He's cleared the creep out here. And if we just hit pause, so at this point this is like your basic ZVT where I've held like about 5 pushes and I've done a counter where I've killed some SCVs. Now a lot of times Terran can recover from like one mineral line being wiped, but if you manage to wipe a second, they really lose momentum, especially in that sort of 3-base 2-2 push style, and it really inhibits them from being powerful in the mid game. So remember a few minutes ago when I won that big fight and came in here, and even though I didn't kill him and I lost a lot of lings, I cleared a few SCVs. Again, we'll hit Control R. That's 13 workers I killed. Here, this is like a classic ZVT maneuver that you do, where when the Terran starts to push you, you have some lings out by his natural. You make him into Banes, and when he finally commits and is focusing on pretending to be Marine King and microing, you have Banes going to his mineral line and gut his production. So let's see what happens. Now the key to this, before you don't want to send the Banes in like when he's sort of like right now he's setting up shop, and this is like when he's for sure sort of watching his army and getting ready. You want to sort of wait like one more cycle through in terms of his attention. So right now he's like for sure watching his army about to push. You want to wait until he does like the next set of pushes and he's absolutely committed and he's never going to be willing to look back at his base. So here, delay, he's killing creep. And again, like I'm not perfect, but for a very long time when I was playing Starcraft, I would fucking like always lose those queens. So even though I lost a couple this game, I've gotten way better at retaining them. So here, he does his real push. He pushes up onto creep, he commits. He's not just doing a herp-de-derp, I'm gonna siege shit out and try to push you, or contain you rather. And this is why creep spread is so important. Because in a normal game, if I wasn't spreading creep properly or he had killed it really well and killed all my queens, he could push all the way up into here, get his tank set up, and I would be in a position where I was forced to fight. But because the creep is all the way out here, he has to set up once, stop, give me time to inject, make more stuff, get my counterattack ready. Then he has to push up again, and suddenly that's valuable time wasted. Every valuable second you give a Zerg is more time you give them to prepare. So whenever you're watching your own replays, especially a Zerg, you need to consider like I need to be delaying these pushes as long as possible. And then one of your best tricks is actually counterattacking and making them panic and pushing up into a bad spot, or pushing up into a bad spot and then countering when you know they're pot committed. So let's see what happens. He tries to push, and notice whenever he goes off creep, I know that he has to push because I'm about to run in and deal severe economic damage, and this means that like after that happens he's going to be like too far behind to win with this upgrade situation. Remember, I'm 2-2, he doesn't even have his started. So I run away, and here's when I run the banelings in, because I know at this point he's hard committed. I don't run them in right when his push starts and he's like still macroing and maybe looking back here and rallying stuff. When do I run him in? Whenever he absolutely has to go in. So what happens? That happens. Control R again. And at that point, it's 60 workers to 37. He's pretty fucked. And he hard commits. I move through, and this mouthy little rodent gets embarrassed. You got lucky. Yeah, that always feels good to see when people type out with stuff like that. So at the end of the game, what should you be looking for, win or lose, especially if you're Zerg? A, creep spread. How good was your creep spread? Well, mine was pretty damn good. It went pretty far into even the area he was contesting and branched off into the other parts of the map, which you always want. Another thing, where are my overlords? Spread across the map. If I go to my vision, it was going to be really hard for him to sneak a drop by me. Another thing is my money. Now, admittedly, this isn't like the most important thing at the very, very end, because like for the, not to say that like you should quit whenever you're ahead or like start talking shit, but there are a lot of times where it's like for the last 20 seconds of a Starcraft game where you're in his base and you've wiped his army, you sort of know you've won. So like right here, like we can see my money is getting kind of high. And let's just like what we want to see here. So if I'm watching my own replay and I want to improve, what am I looking for here? I want to make sure my upgrades are going and I'm scouting and I have my head out of my ass. So if we go to production, there's no infestation pit, so I can't get hive and I can't get 3-3, which is fine because this is like a very mid-game focused game. So I sort of sense the push here. I start spreading my creep and notice 18 lings come up in the production queue as well as a bunch of banes. That's perfect timing. You see the push coming, you make a bunch of lings to spend your larva, and then you make a bunch of banes. You don't want to be in a position where he gets to here and you start morphing your banes. That was very close to the situation I was up here whenever he pushed, and if I hadn't been fastidious about my creep spread and he was able to like pressure those slow banelings off of creep, I could have lost. So I hope that helped you in terms of viewing a Starcraft replay. Few things to remember: you want to have the production tab up a lot of the time. The APM counter is worthless until the end. Notice that let's just go back a few and like just watch the APM tab through the actual like mutiling baneling part of the game that requires APM. So remember, this guy was at about 400 in the early game and I was at 50 because there was nothing to do. And notice at this point he's 150 APM below where he was spamming, and I'm above him APM wise. That's why APM in the early game doesn't mean anything. Notice how my APM keeps going up and up as the game goes on, and his stagnates because he was never a 380 APM player. He was a 150 APM player who sat here and did this a billion times in the early game. And if I hit the F keys, my camera hotkeys, so I'll jump from here to here to here, from here to here to here. If you ever see my first person VODs, you know what I'm talking about. A lot of players do that, but those F key clicks don't count towards APM. So I can hit there and do the F keys like fucking 500 APM, F1, F2, F3, F4, cycling between all my camera hotkeys, and I could have the APM open and it won't show. So I'm bouncing back and forth, not really doing like a full 1 through 4 spam. I'm more focused and just playing standard, but you can see like basically both players, I'm like the Zerg in this case does more than the Terran. The Terran is just making shit in their base, but APM fucking tab is worthless late. Let's just see what the EPM tab is for kicks. Sort of funny. EPM sort of a joke too, but anyway, if this helped you learn how to view your Starcraft replays and improve, leave a like rating. Mainly, guys, just watch your fucking money, watch your scouting, watch your supply blocks. If you get all that taken care of, you'll be in diamond in no time.